Hamas, through attorneys in the United Kingdom, has filed suit to have its terror listing delisted. We can put this first element up on the screen. This is reported in Dropsite News by Jeremy Scahill this morning. It's a more than 100-page legal filing that includes several components. One of which we want to just go through here because it is kind of a historic and kind of fascinating document. One of the founders of Hamas, Musa Abu Marzouk, filed a kind of 11 or 12-page kind of accompanying letter along with it, in which he makes the case for why Hamas should not actually be listed as a terror group. The basis for the case is Hamas has never. This is the argument that they make. Hamas has never engaged in any attacks, outside of what they call historic Palestine. They specifically note that despite the UK's role in facilitating the ongoing genocide, they have never and will never attack Britain in any way. They said if a British citizen signs up for the IDF and comes into Gaza, right, then they're fair game. But otherwise, they, unlike some other Palestinian factions, have never engaged in any terrorism or militant action outside of what they would call historic Palestine, or the Zionist entity or whatever. They also have, and we want to go into detail of this because I think it's really interesting. They also talk about free speech, the threat that Zionism poses to free speech in the West. They talk about anti-Semitism. And not only do they decry the scourge of anti-Semitism, they argue, kind of echoing arguments that you hear on this program, that conflating anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, conflating anti-Semitism with criticism of Israel, waters down the definition of anti-Semitism and actually makes it more likely that you're going to see more anti-Semitism. Hamas specifically praises Jewish students who have participated in protests around the world and in the U.S., and even praises Jewish Israelis who have protested against the slaughter of civilians. And I don't think any Hamas official has ever done that before, ever praised an Israeli citizen who was a Jewish Israeli citizen. Like I think that is a first. They also talk about what they would see as "quote unquote" national liberation. In this document they do not recognize Israel. Say they will never recognize Israel. Say that the only solution, long term, is complete liberation.
Meaning no Israel.
No Israel. That's their political line. The very next line, and we can get into this. The very next line says, however, and they always say, ignore everything that comes before the but. So Hamas's but is, but we are willing to accept a long-term truce that is basically a two-state solution along 1967 lines. And the reason they call it a long-term truce is that it allows them to maintain their pride of not having to say that they are willing to recognize Israel and accept a two-state solution while still accepting it as an objective reality. Because they would be saying, well, this is just a long-term truce. Of course, that's all anything is in this world, is a long-term truce. That's all you get. And then after this long-term truce, there would be negotiations that they could, that you then enter into that yields an actual, two-state solution, an actual recognition. But they're not going to do that preemptively, and they think that Arafat doing that preemptively, recognizing Israel without getting the recognition of a Palestinian state, was a mistake that led to the current situation, that endless occupation. I can read some parts from this, but I'm curious if you have any thoughts in general on this, the notion of, even the notion of Hamas engaging with attorneys, can't pay them because they'd be under sanctions if they got paid. So it'd have to be pro bono. But engaging with the West in this way suggests kind of a shift in strategy.
I mean, it seems clearly to suggest a shift in strategy, and one that perhaps could be attributed to the West's, especially the United States, shifting perspective on Israel. It's not to say the West is embracing Hamas, although some of the Israel backers would certainly say that's what's happening. It gets equated, anti-Zionism gets equated, conflated intentionally with support for Hamas. But because people are increasingly skeptical of fully backing Israel, not just on the kind of far left, but we see in opinion polls that creeping more and more into the kind of mainstream public perspective, especially here in the United States. I actually am very curious for your perspective on this, Ryan, if that seems to be something that's juicing Hamas's, I guess, approach to negotiating with the West, that they feel as though now they're in a position where Israel's narrative is slipped a bit, for better or worse, in the West, and they can now come in and operate like a state.
Yeah.
Is that kind of?
Yeah, I think, and I think they have been heartened to see the amount of support from the global public, from so many countries joining South Africa's ICJ case, for instance.
So support not for Hamas, though, because what you just said, people would say, you're saying Hamas is heartened by the support for Hamas.
The support for resistance against Israel. Yeah, and they a lot of them equate that to some support for Hamas, because as like Hamas argues,
Hamas equates that with support for Hamas, even though many of the people who are backing or who are opposing Israel would say
we support Hamas.
Hey,
and Hamas actually addresses that in this legal filing, or at least in this side letter. What they say is, look, a lot of what they say is, we understand people are against the genocide. People are against what Israel is doing. And we are the ones that are fighting against that, like literally fighting against it. So therefore, you've got to give us some credit for doing that. But the discussion of anti-Semitism is truly fascinating. So let's roll through some of this, and you can put that first element back up on the screen. For some of this, he writes, we reject any allegations that we are anti-Semitic or that we target Jewish people. And this is a fascinating line. He says, I appreciate that there is a level of controversy surrounding some of the wording of our founding charter. The founding charter includes explicit anti-Semitism.
Yes.
So he explains then, or argues, this was drafted without consultation with the senior leadership, who were either in prison or in exile at the time. Hamas has published a series of other documents since then, culminating in our Document of General Principles and Policies of 2017, all of which expressly distinguish between Jews and Zionists. I have incorporated parts of that policy within this witness statement as continuing to reflect the positions of the movement. So that is as close as you're going to get, I think, to an apology for the language the anti-Semitic language that was in the original charter documents. And then he goes on to say explicitly, our struggle is not against Jewish people because of their religion, but against the Zionists who occupy Palestine. Yet it is the Zionists who constantly identify Judaism and the Jewish people and with their own colonial project and illegal entity. We acknowledge and appreciate the solidarity shown to our people and our struggle by many Jewish people around the world, including within, quote, Israel, whose stance against Zionism exposes the dangerous lies that conflates Judaism with Zionism. And that's the line that I was saying. I was talking to Jeremy about this morning, and he was saying he thinks that that's kind of an unprecedented statement from a member of Hamas, a founding member of Hamas even, to say we acknowledge and appreciate the solidarity shown to our people by many Jewish people, including within Israel. I mean, they put Israel in quotes because that's what they do, because they don't recognize it officially. But that is a significant step. So they go on. We are particularly appalled, and this is the part that I said sounds like they're watching this program. We are particularly appalled by the weaponization of anti-Semitism to attempt to silence those standing against apartheid, occupation, and genocide. The Zionist entity and its supporters have completely undermined the struggle against genuine anti-Semitism by manipulating the term to protect the Zionist entity from criticism and censure. Over the past year, Zionists have accused numerous officials and institutions of being anti-Semitic, including the UN Special Rapporteur, the UN General Secretary, UNRWA, the ICJ, the ICC, the government of South Africa, the Irish Taoiseach Simon Harris, and the President of Ireland, Michael Higgins. In the process, Zionists have debased and degraded the important definition of anti-Semitism until it means almost nothing. Zionists, many of them not Jewish, have deliberately fashioned an utterly warped definition of anti-Semitism, and they consciously wield it to shield Zionism and Israel from entirely legitimate criticism. At a time when actual anti-Semitism is on the rise, this shameless crying wolf is a staggeringly irresponsible and dangerous policy to pursue. It diminishes our ability to combat anti-Semitism when and where it does actually arise. Where's the lie?
I mean, there's plenty of genuine anti-Semitism among...
That is Hamas's point, which is fascinating. Hamas is calling out
its own...
the rise. No. Hamas is saying anti-Semitism is on the rise. Genuine anti-Semitism is on the rise.
Yeah.
And this conflation of Zionism and anti-Semitism is fueling it.
Right.
Which is true.
And their argument is going to be that they are now the bulwark. They are
arguing
the
that
tip of the
they are
spear
doing more than the ADL
fighting
to combat
anti-Semitism.
anti-Semitism. Yes.
I mean, that's I feel like the galaxy brain meme where it's like the game of 4D chess.
But if you step back, like, why is Hamas's argument is our problem is with the Zionists.
Yeah, I think it's interesting.
Yeah.
I'm just skeptical that it's actually representative of Hamas leadership's views. It sounds like tactically, I think tactically it's very clever. I'm just genuinely skeptical that, that charter was changed, in 2017, 2018?
2017 is when it was codified. Like he was saying, there were many steps taken in that direction to move away from that anti-Semitic language that was inserted in the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about there is a non-insignificant portion of people who are in the Gaza Strip who aren't even in Hamas who have, I would say, deep bigotry. And I'm not saying it doesn't exist on the other side, but have deep bigotry towards Jews. And so I suppose I think it's both substantively important and interesting that they're making this tactical, I think you're right, tactical shift. I also think I'm skeptical of how genuinely that represents their position. So they spell this. They go further into the history. It's really interesting.
Into the history here,
yeah.
And make the point, which historically is an accurate point, that there has been far more anti-Semitism in Europe and if you include Russia and Europe, than in the Middle East over the years. That's just been the case. So here they write, the Palestinian people have always stood against oppression, injustice, and the committing of massacres against civilians, regardless of who commit them. Based on our religious and moral values, we clearly stated our rejection to what the Jews were exposed to by the Nazi Germany. Hamas is of the view that the, quote, Jewish problem, anti-Semitism, and the persecution of the Jews are phenomena fundamentally linked to European history and not to the history of the Arabs and the Muslims or to their heritage. The Arab and Islamic environment was an example of coexistence, cultural interaction, and religious freedoms. The current conflict is caused by the Zionist aggressive behavior and its alliance with the Western colonial powers. Therefore, we reject the exploitation of the Jewish suffering in Europe to justify the oppression against our people in Palestine. The Zionist movement, which was able, with the help of Western powers, to occupy Palestine, is the most dangerous form of settler colonialism. That form has already been defeated and eradicated from much of the world and must similarly be defeated and eradicated from Palestine. And that's an argument that you hear a lot, that obviously Nazi Germany was a European. That was Europe. And you'll often hear people say, what did Palestine have to do with that? Why did Palestine pay for the genuine sins of Europe, which flowed out of their history of anti-Semitism? Like what? Yeah, the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire compared to Europe, far better place for
I mean, indeed,
Jewish people.
Jews were fleeing anti-Semitism in Europe.
To the Ottoman Empire.
Going to
the Ottoman Empire and being recruited to go there.
Yeah. I mean, there's something interesting. So there's this is, to the point I was making, this was back in 2019, a Hamas official.
Oh, and when did Spain really kick off its real anti-Semitic purge? When the Muslims left.
So this Hamas official back in 2019, Fatih Hamad, had said, all of you 7 million Palestinians abroad, enough of the warming up. You have Jews everywhere, and we must attack every Jew on the globe. What was this one again?
Say that again.
This is a 2019 quote from a Hamas official, Fatih Hamad, who said, all of you 7 million Palestinians abroad, enough of the warming up. You have Jews everywhere. We must attack every Jew on the globe by way of slaughter and killing, if God permits. Enough of the warming up. Well, back in 2019, so before October 7th, obviously, he walked that back. The point that you're making, he was clearly under pressure from Hamas's political leadership.
Like, what are you doing?
Right. And
it's not our policy.
And he said in a statement that was posted on Hamas's website, Hamas's consistent adopted policy of limiting its resistance to the Zionist occupation that usurps Palestine's land and defiles its holy sites. That he said that's what he supports. Now, limiting its resistance to the Zionist occupation that usurps Palestine's land. And this is both the point you're making and I think the point that I'm making, which is it's not new for Hamas to start trending in this direction, but this represents a significant tactical shift. On the other hand, my point is just that I don't think you go from point A to point B if you're Fatih Hamad, because you've suddenly had a change of heart and don't think Palestinians everywhere should kill Jews everywhere. I think you do that because you're under political pressure. And so all I'm saying is that I am skeptical that this represents some type of genuine dissolution of bigotry among the ranks
but
across the board.
Let's say there is anti-Semitism and hatred in the hearts of some members of Hamas, which I don't doubt for a second.
Right.
The question is whether that as a policy is suppressed or whether it is encouraged.
Right. No, I agree. Yeah, I think that's a good question.
Like in the U.S., for instance, there are all kinds of ugly sentiments that some American people have. Whether the government and a political movement is celebrating those and pouring gasoline on them,
right,
versus whether they're telling you they're to go through education and through messaging and through modeling good behavior are saying, no, that's not actually how we as Americans are going to treat immigrants or whoever.
Cultural norms.
Yeah. Just let's do the British part for a second. Marzouk writes, the British government's decision to proscribe Hamas is an unjust one that is symptomatic of its unwavering support for Zionism, apartheid, occupation, ethnic cleansing in Palestine for over a century. Hamas does not and never has posed a threat to Britain, despite the latter's ongoing complicity in the genocide of our people. It is perhaps out of colonial guilt that Britain fears that one day those it oppresses will strike back against the sponsors of the Zionist entity. Britain should have no such fear, unquote. Like, look, guys, we're like our beef. And they're like, look, our beef is not with you. Like,
so. I mean, I think from like a realist perspective, there's an argument for dealing with Hamas as a state entity that makes negotiating. We saw this with actually Steve Witkoff, and Witkoff got a ton of flack for actually stepping in when the Biden administration's negotiations with Hamas had stalled for a long time. So you can't talk to Hamas, you can't deal with Hamas, you can't negotiate with Hamas. And Witkoff came in and actually yielded results to have direct negotiations. I mean, he was going through Qatar, obviously, but to have more direct negotiations with Hamas, does that put the world on a better track to some lasting peace? I think, as uncomfortable as it is for the West, it probably does.
And while we're talking about uncomfortable things, let's do another one here. They have a section on prisoners. So I want people to hear this, whether they agree with it or not. It is a tragic reality that almost every Palestinian household has a family member being detained in an Israeli prison. Ooh, they forgot to put the quotes around Israeli there. Guess they just recognized Israel. Look at that. Since 1967, over 800,000 Palestinians, including children, have been incarcerated by the Zionist military. The thousands of Palestinian political prisoners or hostages currently languishing in Zionist prisons, where they are routinely tortured, raped, and mistreated, include hundreds of women and children, many of whom are subject to administrative detention, which can be renewed indefinitely. That is true. The release of the Palestinian prisoners is a consensus position. And this is where it gets uncomfortable for Western ears. The release of the Palestinian prisoners is a consensus position among Palestinians with strong support from all sectors of society. Where appeals to the international community to release our prisoners have fallen on deaf ears, our experience has demonstrated that the most effective method of liberating our prisoners is through the prisoner exchange process. So in case that needs translation for anybody, they are explaining to the public and to the British government here why they take hostages. That there are thousands of Palestinian prisoners rotting away in administrative detention, facing, according to human rights groups, torture, sexual assault in a systematic way. The world public has been unable to get them out, so they're going to take. And what they're saying, what they have found is the most successful way to get them out is to take hostages and then exchange the hostages. And that's true. Like that, that has been, and that was the real goal of October 7th, was to take a lot of hostages.
Right.
And then exchange them for the thousands of prisoners.
Right.
They're saying the root cause of their hostage taking is your hostage taking. Like that's the argument that they're making here. Like I said, that's not going to be a comfortable one for Western ears.
No. No.
But that's what people mean when they say history didn't start on October 7th.
Well, it's also the problem with just putting everybody into this, like a box that can't be opened or dealt with, is you end up flattening people and not understanding their, like, how they see their intentions and motivations, which if you want to, quote, defeat Hamas or crush Hamas, you have to actually understand Hamas. You can't just dismiss how they see their intentions and motivations. It's not to say those intentions and motivations are right. It's just to say it's actually useful to understand their intentions and motivations.
Yeah. Couple other pieces. They try to take credit for the Great March of Return. This was the 2018 nonviolent civil society-led demonstrations that every Friday would kind of march to the fence and picnic, and it was kind of celebratory. And it was the kind of nonviolent resistance that defenders of Israel have always said, this is what the Palestinians should do. This is what we would respect. This is like Gandhi. This is like MLK. Do that, and we'll give you your liberation. Instead, they gave them bullets in their knees, created an entire generation of crippled people in Palestine. Hamas initially kind of resisted the Great March of Return, but because it was so popular in Gaza, eventually endorsed it. The way they cover it here is they say Hamas has a history of both armed and unarmed resistance. The latter was manifested in its support and facilitation of initiatives like the Great March of Return and Hamas's involvement in parliamentary elections. Unfortunately, such initiatives were only met with further military assaults by the Zionist entity and genocidal sanctions imposed by the Western world. I think we can finish with, let's touch on their writing of October 7th, because this is also at the center of obviously everything. This is why 18 months later is still being flattened. So he writes, on the morning of October 7th, the Qassam brigades executed a military maneuver targeting the Gaza division of Israel's Southern Command, so very clearly situating it as a military effort, not directed at civilians. That's the point he's trying to make there. Much has been said and written about the operation, but there has been little coverage in the English-speaking world about the intended nature of the operation as articulated by the movement itself in its various written statements and interviews over the past 17 months, I have prepared a separate witness statement focusing on the operation. Suffice to say here that the instructions given to our elite forces, our Nukba, were to kill and capture Zionist soldiers and not to target women, children, and the elderly. To the extent that any individual crimes were allegedly committed by our soldiers, we have internal mechanisms for investigating and disciplining them. Unlike the Zionist entity, we take justice and accountability very seriously, and to that extent, we remain, as always, prepared to cooperate with any international investigations and inquiries into the operation, even if Israel refuses to do so. As we know, hundreds of civilians were killed, particularly those attending the festival, as well as people who were in the kibbutzim. This is their effort to say that was not their policy, that they regret it, and that they're open to investigations. I don't know what investigations they have. No, they're sort of claiming here that they would have carried out some internal investigations and found people who committed these war crimes and brought them to justice. I haven't seen any evidence that has happened. Doesn't mean it hasn't, but I haven't seen any evidence. A lot of those soldiers would have been killed, like never actually made it back to Gaza to face that alleged inquiry. But anyway, how do you read that writing of October 7th?
I mean, I don't find it surprising. It's all. This is the report here overall is just I think indicative of something changing, and that's what. It's not entirely surprising, but it does seem new. I don't know. It's something new. Yeah, it's trying to meet. It's right.
It's trying to acknowledge. It actually it is what it is. They use the word alleged, but what they're doing is acknowledging that war crimes were committed.
Yeah.
And that there should be an investigation into those war crimes. The fact that the rave was happening there has changed history in such a profound way.
Yeah.
And we've been working on an investigation that we'll have out soon at Drop Site, I hope, about why that rave was given an extra night. Like, do you know the story here? Like,
yes.
It was not supposed to even be there on Saturday.
Yeah.
And by Friday, there were all sorts of intel warnings that something was happening. Mm-hmm. And they applied for an extra night. And they're like a mile from the fence and were granted it.
Yeah.
What were they doing there in the first place when there's like so much area in the desert where they could be?
Yeah.
Like what? And if they had not been there, the number of civilian casualties would have been many hundreds less, and the number of hostages significantly less. That does not forgive or excuse the decision by the militants there, terrorists there, to kill innocent people who are just there celebrating. It doesn't forgive that for a second. Last piece, I'll just so I can, because I went over this, but I'll just read it. This is their proposed 67 solution. Hamas believes that no part of the land of Palestine shall be compromised or conceded, irrespective of the causes, the circumstances, and the pressures, and no matter how long the occupation lasts. Hamas rejects any alternative to the full and complete liberation of Palestine from the river to the sea. So there's the piece that defenders of Israel say, see, I told you. All they want is the eradication of Israel, complete, total genocide of Israel. However, without compromising its rejection of the Zionist entity and without relinquishing any Palestinian rights, and this is where their compromise comes, when they say they're not compromising, Hamas considers the establishment of a fully sovereign and independent Palestinian state with Jerusalem as its capital along the ceasefire line of the 4th of June, 1967, with the return of the refugees and the displaced to their homes from which they were expelled, to be a formula of national consensus. Hamas has on numerous occasions for over 2 decades proposed a hudna, or long-term truce, on this basis. Its goodwill has been abused by the Zionists, who have assassinated members of its leadership to undermine such efforts. So that's a reference to there are internal fights, schisms within Hamas over this question. There are people who support this, basically what is a two-state end game within Hamas, and then there are those who do not. And Israel has systematically assassinated all of the ones who are in the moderate camp,
Right.
in order to elevate the extremist camp, and then to point to the extremists as the reason that you need to do endless war. And notice what they call. They don't say they support it. What they say, they consider it a formula of national consensus. Like 'cause they're really being pulled to it.
Yeah.
Kind of being forced to. All right. They're like we understand that Palestinian national consensus is that this would be an acceptable outcome, and we're not going to get in the way of that. So anyway, that's
Well, the rest of the Arab world matters.
and the right of
too.
return. That's like Israelis will also say, well, they're calling for the return of hostages to their homes, which makes it impossible because you'd have to uproot people who are currently in their homes. But that's where you negotiate. What is that? What is it? What do you do with that right? Like you have that right, but is that right? Can that right then be assigned to a different home? Like you're not going to actually physically remove people from their homes like settlers do in the West Bank on a regular basis.
Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.